Thank you all for joining us. It's great to be back. So right now I'd like to bring up Boaz Soifer, the CEO of BayWa RE Solar Systems.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all of our panelists and attendees. I'm really excited to be here with you today, to be back together. I wanted to mention we are commemorating Juneteenth this year. You've probably seen announcements from a few other solar companies and are familiar with what Juneteenth is, but in case you're not, it's June 19th, which is this Friday, and it's the anniversary of the reading of federal orders in Galveston, Texas in 1865, announcing that black slaves in Texas were freed. And even though the Emancipation Proclamation predated Juneteenth by 2.5 years, emancipation wasn't enforced consistently in Texas, and Juneteenth marks the beginning of that enforcement. So we are going to take a couple of hours as an organization to partly educate ourselves and partly join the celebration. We decided not to take the whole company offline for the day on short notice because you, our customers, have orders that you need shipped and delivered and work in progress. So if we'd had more notice, we probably would take the whole day to, again, educate and commemorate. But this year we're just going to take a smaller chunk of time. So you'll see an announcement about that, but I wanted everyone to be aware of it. And I want to mention also that our DEI team, that stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, is also brainstorming a lot of other initiatives in which we hope to engage the solar community and work together to build an industry that really is grounded in the understanding that social justice and environmental justice are two sides of the same coin. And we're excited to continue building that awareness. So in terms of why we're here today, I'm super excited to talk about innovation. And we have a really esteemed panel and a lot of interesting perspectives on innovation, both in general and in solar. And we use buzzwords a lot, like mental models, but really this is about curiosity and being open-minded about or even embracing new possibilities. And, you know, as leaders in the solar industry, also role modeling that for our teams. So super excited about the conversation today. Thank you all again for being here. And I'll flip it back to you, Tom.
Okay, great. Thanks, Boaz. So before I bring up our guests, I want to set up the conversation we're going to have today a little bit more. For the last few months, we've been discussing very tactical topics, on these town halls. How to close sales virtually was 2 weeks ago. We talked about the stimulus, how to get PPP funding, and a lot of other very tactical things. But this week we want to look ahead a little bit more, talk about the future, but also look back over the last couple months and think about what we've learned. So Boaz penned an article a couple weeks ago called "Mental Models for the New Normal," and that was the seed for our discussion today. And of course, we're all waiting, and wondering when things will get back to normal. But this article asks us, is getting back to normal really what we want to do? Is that where we want to go? And so, we've seen pictures all around the world of animals out in urban areas, air pollution levels at decade lows. We've seen some positive aspects, of stopping air and car traffic. And do we want to go back to, pre-COVID business as usual? Another example is, selling solar online, instead of at the kitchen table. That's something that we're seeing a lot more of, in our Amazon, buy everything, research everything online age, is in-person sales, the way to go anymore. So we're not out of the woods yet, clearly, in terms of the pandemic. Consumer sentiment is low. We're in a recession. We'll talk about these things. But now, is there an opportunity to rethink, business as usual in the solar industry? What mental models did we have before? What do we want to leave behind? And so to help talk about all these ideas, as Boaz mentioned, we have a great panel today. I'm really excited. And I'd like to introduce them. So we have Vikram Aggarwal. He's the CEO and founder of Energy Sage. And Jessica, if you would mind, please bringing people up online. And Jessica is in the back. She's our producer, and she does a wonderful job. So welcome, Vikram. I believe you're muted. We also have Scott Nguyen. He's the CEO of 17 Terawatts, a solar software company based out of Austin, Texas. Joseph Marhamathi of Ipsun. We have Martha Amram. She's an economist and CEO of Glynt.ai. And we also have Ned Calder on the line today. He's with an innovation consulting firm based out of Boston, founded by Clay Christensen. And and I didn't mention that Joe is our only solar contractor on the line today, so we're going to try not to beat up on him too much. But I'd like to kick it off with you, Ned. And I believe, Ned, you're muted. Ned, you work across industries as part of an innovation consulting team at Innosight. You mentioned in our pre-call last week that industries and companies tend to get habituated, as well as do consumers. Can you explain what you mean by that, and maybe give us an example?
Yeah, sure. And unfortunately, there's lots of examples that we could talk about. If you fundamentally look at a lot of companies, they're built for efficiency, not necessarily adaptability. And there's lots of reasons for this. You could point to capital markets and the tyranny of quarterly earnings. You could talk about cultural issues. But there's a lot of factors that make it very difficult for companies, once they get to a certain scale and size, to evolve their model when the environment around them changes. And there's lots of great examples. I mean, the famous ones of Kodak and and others, where the technology changed, the customer needs change, and they struggled to evolve and and adapt, and in a lot of cases went away as new entrants who had brought in new models were able to thrive and prosper. So that's a lot of what we see. And if you actually look at the data, the average lifespan on the S&P 500 has been going steadily down over the last 60 years, and I think right now it's something like 15 or 20 years, versus when it was started it was more like 60. And I think that's a reflection of just the pace of change of technology, and consumers' willingness to adopt, sort of new models has accelerated the sort of creative destruction aspect that exists in our economy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Scott, I'd like to bounce over to you. And you're muted as well, just so you know. But let's talk about the consumer for a minute. Your company comes at solar from the customer experience angle. What, in your opinion, has gotten stale in terms of the customer experience? What do solar contractors often get wrong about the customer experience of going solar? What needs to change?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think sometimes when you think about the customer experience, and for solar in particular, since it takes some amount of time, 3-4 months plus, to go from contract to finally powering on, that it's sometimes convenient just to assume that if a customer isn't complaining, then they must be fine. But in fact, there's really a good number of these customers who aren't necessarily satisfied, but they're also not going to complain. And so in fact, 4 out of 5 homeowners we interviewed remember that installation commissioning process itself negatively. And this is important because for us in the industry, all these this entire pool of these, you can call these so-so customers, they're a lost opportunity for a good review or a lost opportunity for a referral. And so what really needs to change is to really try to increase engagement, increase this customer engagement. But for companies in the industry, try to be able to do that efficiently and at scale. That's where they really need to embrace the digital channels and be able to embrace automation, because that's what's going to really be able to make it efficient and also scalable.
Okay. Vikram, let's pull you in here. Do you have anything to add to Scott's comments? And it would be great to hear from you about, some of the barriers that you're seeing to change in the industry right now.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think as we are talking about the topic of innovation, let's start with the fact that innovation is very difficult, no matter what industry we talk about. So solar is not unique from any perspective, and it's difficult to innovate because I think we are creatures of habit. We get used to doing things a certain way, and it is very difficult for us to challenge ourselves to really think differently. And that's why I think sometimes you see innovation coming from outsiders, and very, very few times that you see innovation coming from inside the industry. So I really agree with Scott. I think that talking to consumers, talking to your customers is very important. I hear this sometimes that, hey, our team is talking to the customer, our sales team is talking to the customer. They're not really talking to the customer. They're giving a sales pitch, right? Talking to the customer is really trying to peel the onion, really understanding what the customer is thinking about, why are they thinking about this, and really going down the 5 whys, if you would, to really keep asking, hey, if you're happy, why are you happy? And if you're not happy, why are you not happy? And then just keep digging and find those reasons. And that will help us with coming up with creative ideas.
Great. So maybe there's a redefinition of what the sales approach is that companies should be thinking about. What questions are they asking? What data are sales gathering along the way that they can bring back and help inform the conversation about what the company is, how they're positioned, or what their target audience is. I'd like to throw out to our audience as well. Please ask any questions. You can throw them in the Q&A. And if our panelists, want to follow up off of one another, just dive right in. Just let me know. Joe, I'd like to bounce over to you from as our sole solar contractor on the show today. Great to have your perspective. You're very focused on the day-to-day of running your business, but you're also at Ipsun, you're keenly aware of new technologies and systems, whether they be for sales, as you talked about on previous town halls. What do you feel are the antiquated aspects of the solar industry? Maybe business as usual isn't working, as it should. Do you have any guidance you'd like to share with other solar contractors?
Yeah, I think there's a couple areas where we could improve. The first one is the need for in-person site surveys. I think one thing that most solar contractors have learned in the last few months is that you don't really need an in-person site survey in every single case. So we've seen with our solar proposal software, Solar Graph, they introduced a virtual site survey feature where when you sell a solar system, you can immediately send a link to the customer to perform their own self-site survey. And that's something that they can do in about 30 minutes on their own time, at their convenience. If you can go into your attic and you can take pictures from the street of your home, you can do a self-site survey. And that can be enough data and information for the PV designer and a professional engineer to provide a permit set that's stamped, certified, and can be submitted for permitting. So that's one area where you can save a lot of time, you can save money, makes the customer happy because there's less people involved in the front end and it moves the project faster. It doesn't work for everybody. You have some people with kids or that are older that can't do their own self-survey. Sometimes you have a flat roof where you really need somebody on site. But I think in about 4 out of 5 cases, most people can do a self-survey, and that will save a lot of time and money. The other area where I think things are a little stodgy and we can innovate is the need for dedicated project managers. So one nice thing about Bodhi, Scott's software, is that it's sort of like a digital assistant or digital project manager, where if you connect it to your CRM, your customers can see what stage their project is at. That's something that traditionally solar installers have used a dedicated project manager for, who doesn't necessarily do designs or permits or interconnections, but just has a customer relationship. So what we've done is we've made our salesperson the point of contact. So they sell the job, and then they're the one person that the customer can come back to with questions. They can look in the CRM and see what the status is. But then if they want to ever log into Bodhi, they can see what the actual step is that their project is at, and lots more information. So those are a couple areas where I think we can save money, speed up the project, and inform the customer by innovating.
Okay, great.
Hey, Tom, could
Martha,
I build on that one real quick?
of course, yeah.
I love the example about the not necessarily needing to do the in-person visit. I mean, I think it ties, Boaz, to your point on sort of shifting mental models. And one of the things that we see in a lot of industries that struggle with change is there's these sort of rules, norms, assumptions about the way things work that gets baked in, and maybe at some point in time they were legitimate, but then we forget the sort of underlying reasons why they were there, and fail to question them. And a lot of disruptions that you see is companies challenging those assumptions. And I'm just reminded of the example or analogy of the automotive industry, where there was a very similar assumption that to buy or sell a used car, you had to see it. The dealer had to see it to be able to evaluate it, or the consumer would want to test drive it before they bought it. And so that prevented a lot of change in that industry for a long time. And now you see models like Carvana that do everything digitally. You don't see the car, you just see images and pictures of it, and they're getting a ton of traction. And it's really caused people to rethink that assumption, and also to be innovative about how you design the business model around that. So in order to maybe allay people's fears, they've offered 7-day no questions asked return policy, so that alleviates some of the risk associated with that. So this notion of figuring out what are some of the baked in assumptions to our industries, and which ones are legitimate, which ones are illegitimate, and how do we challenge them, seems like an important dynamic.
Great. Martha, I want to bounce over to you, but right before, Joe, we got a question from Dave, and he agrees with everything you're saying. It's great for customers to be satisfied and engaged, and same with Scott. But what gets them excited about going solar? And I want to touch on education in a minute, because that's a big component. But Joe, what gets your customers excited about the process of going solar?
Well, I can tell you this is a sales pitch we've used since day one, but it's particularly relevant right now. A lot of folks, when they don't know much about solar and they're first coming to it, they think of it as expensive, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. They don't necessarily know that it's an investment, like investing in a fund or in the S&P. Solar is an untaxed stock market return with no volatility. That usually gets people pretty excited when we use that phrase, and it's particularly relevant now because of all the market turmoil and the downturn. It's untaxed because it's savings on your utility bill. IRS can't go after that. It's a stock market return when you look at that annual percentage and the payback time, and there's no volatility because as long as the sun rises every morning, you're getting the same return every single day. So for us, when we use that phrase and it clicks with people, and we show them 25 years of savings down to the penny, that gets them excited, particularly in an economic downturn. So we try to frame it very practically. Obviously, there's people that have environmental considerations when they go solar, which is great. But for a lot of people, most people, it is a bottom line decision. And so whether the market's doing well or not well, that's usually a pretty compelling idea.
Great. Martha, I'd like to bounce over to you just to, root us in the present day for a minute. And I'd like to have Jessica share 2 slides that you brought. But can you chat about these for a moment, and then give us your takeaway about what solar contractors should be focusing on right now, and then we'll tie that back to innovations.
Thanks, and delighted to be here with the fresh sheet of paper mentality. So when you're walking into the home, what should you expect in terms of the consumer mindset? This consumer sentiment indicator is a national indicator and tells you exactly that. It's highly correlated with spending. So because consumers comprise 70% of the overall economy, watching this index is not only about the mindset in your home, but it is about a summary of all the noisy macroeconomic COVID environment in one indicator. It's released every month and about the 10th of the month. So in April, it plunged from March to April. And then in May, it picked up a bit. So a lot of the headlines were, wow, it's picking up. But I think the real headline is, oh, it's pretty much the same. And that means when you walk into the home, the household is in what I call recession mentality. It's a noisy environment. They've got to prioritize, and investing is a second order priority to household budget today. So as we think about the typical solar consumer, the household with about 70,000 household income per year is probably faced a job loss or is fearful they would. So this indicator says they're going to have a real hard time thinking about investment. So changing the whole solar pitch into a consumption one, save today, would be a way to address this, what you see here from this index.
Mm-hmm. Great. And why don't you talk about the next slide and then, give us your takeaways.
So as consumer spending data is released, it's broken down by categories. And again, reinforcing the immediacy norms that we're seeing in consumers' brains. The industries like furniture and auto parts, those are maintenance and investment. And of course, those stores have been closed. But you also see that as stores open, people are not flooding to buy better furniture. And they're actually flooding online, and as we see new markets open across the country, we're seeing restaurants start to pick up speed. So when we're thinking about what they want to buy, if you track this kind of categories, you'll see eventually consumers spending for their future, but we see a lot of immediacy today. So one of the ways you can poke into the consumer brain, and this picks up on the digital CRM, is through software and through software tools. You can assure consumers of what they're buying. And so more and more about, this is exactly what you're going to get. Or even before they've bought solar, let's track your house during the sales process as if you were on solar. This is exactly what you're going to get. All those things cut through the noise that say consumers are out there meeting immediate needs. And suddenly saving money can become an immediate need.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Martha. So we can stop sharing the screen now. And Scott, I'd like to bounce over to you. This brings up something interesting you said the other day. You mentioned in 5 to 10 years, energy will be consumer driven. And you talked about EVs and storage as examples, but you also mentioned that consumers don't really understand these technologies, and there's a huge education opportunity here. Can you dig into that a little bit more? And how do contractors get ahead of that curve?
Yeah, so most certainly. So for us, for us here on the panel, for those on the call, we think about energy day in and day out. But for the average consumer, especially the mass consumer that's going solar these days, we've transitioned from those early adopters now more to the mass consumer as the industry. Those guys, they don't think about energy day in, day out. They don't know necessarily what a kilowatt hour is, and they don't know the difference between a microinverter or a DC optimizer. But they're really still happy that they have solar and that they are making an impact. And so really the key thing is to try to understand that people's relationship with energy is really not with energy itself, but with what energy makes possible. So with activities they do, places they go, people that they interact with. And so the best way to get ahead of this, the curve, is to do the great work with that initial solar system that you're selling, and then try to build that deep relationship with that customer. So that when that customer does ask, hey, what about those batteries that I keep on hearing about? Or, hey, I'm thinking about an EV. Do I need to install anything? What they will do is they'll just come back and ask you, and trust that the recommendations that you give will be the ones that are best for them. And so that's where the solar contractor's expertise is really most valuable.
Boaz, I'd like to pop over to you. That whole mainstream conversation is one that we've had a lot. When is solar going to be mainstream? But are we at the point where we're not just talking about panels on the roof, but we really are talking about a mainstream solar looking like a home energy management consultant, an energy consultant? How are we going to know when solar is mainstream? Because it's now tied in with all these different things.
Yeah, so I think there were already some great points made on this. Scott was just mentioning how a solar contractor could become more of a solutions provider, and Vikram referred earlier to some other examples. And I think, what I think about when it comes to solar kind of converging with these other verticals is the crossing the chasm take, that in order to go from early adopter to mainstream market, one of the things that has to take place on the part of the suppliers, right? That's us. Contractors are suppliers of solutions, is figuring out how to package the products and services in different ways in order to solve different types of problems for different market segments. And I think we're starting to see that. I think the contractors who have already started offering high efficiency HVAC systems as a potential point of entry for the homeowner to start managing their building envelope and how they use energy more efficiently or more intelligently is one direction, but also smart thermostats and smart doorbells and iPhone apps that integrate multiple products in the home, or contractors that are offering high efficiency lighting rolled in with solar all in one loan. All of that is kind of an organic effort to package solutions differently for different kinds of stakeholders. And I do see that we're going into home energy management or building energy management as the future market. And I think what changes solar from early adopter to mainstream is figuring out how the solutions that we offer address smart home and energy management as a whole. Within that, though, I would add there could well be space for solar contractors to remain solar specialists. Some, not all. When a market kind of stratifies like that, you're going to get contractors and suppliers who integrate solutions, and you're going to get suppliers who are expert in a specific part of that integration, and both of those are valid niches. But as an industry overall, and there's another space we're getting into, sorry to
Sure.
take a lot of time with this, but we also have seen integration between roofing and solar. There are more and more solar contractors offering roofs, and there are more roofing contractors offering solar. And an initiative like California's new home solar mandate probably will accelerate the trades getting into solar. And then we'll be thinking of the home's energy system just like we think about its appliance package or its I haven't bought a home or built a home in a long time, so I don't know what other packages I should refer to, but
Right.
these elements that are thought of in integrated ways. So I think we're in the chasm right now.
Okay. Vikram, given what Boaz just said about, the chasm, but also the need to educate, to put together all of these offerings, how does that relate to the relatively long period between when a consumer starts researching and then when they actually make a purchase? Is this something we should be worried about? Do other industries have similarly long buying cycles? Is it possible to speed up that cycle?
Yeah, I think this is where I think as an industry, if we could spend more time really understanding that customer journey, right? And every customer is likely to be different. There are, as you know, no two customers are alike. So really have to understand and say, hey, where are you in your shopping journey? What are you trying to solve for? And I think I'm parroting both Boaz and Scott on these points to really understand. And I think as a solar company, sometimes we want them to buy our product right now, right? But the customer may not be ready for that. They may be more ready for the building envelope work to be done first, or maybe they want to, their heating and cooling system is failing and they may need to upgrade there. And consumers are always in an information gathering mode, right? So if we can find ways to really educate them as and when the consumer needs to be educated about those things. And when the time comes, consumers will make that purchase, right? So when they are ready for solar, we should be then ready to help them with solar. And so on Energy Sage, when consumers are signing up to get quotes for solar, we ask them, what are the other products you are interested in? And it's very exciting to see that these consumers are very interested in a broad suite of energy products and services. They want to reduce their energy consumption. They want to make their homes better. And I think, as Martha, if you look at the economic cycle, people are now starting to live in their homes for much longer. It used to be it was 7-year average home ownership, and now it is going above 10 and closer to 13, 14 years. And people are really investing in their homes for the long term. So
Right.
This is a great opportunity, whether you offer those services in-house or do you partner with others, right? I think I'll use an example of financial advisors, for example. If you talk to a local financial advisor, they usually have local partnerships with a lawyer, with an insurance agent, with other professionals that a customer may need. So if the customer is thinking about, hey, I'm not ready for making an investment, but I need to figure out my trust, they can bring in their partners. Some larger firms have all those capabilities in-house, large wealth managers. So solar industry may have to, again, think about, parroting Boaz
Right.
here, how to solve the consumer's problem.
Right. Martha, I'd like to pull you in and talk a little bit about software. You and Scott. What are your thoughts on solar software and handling customizations that are going to be needed?
Just picking up exactly where Vikram led off, if we have the empowered solar consultant with the team of experts, then what does that person need at their fingertips? And if you look at the utility bill, and that's where Glynt plays, we turn Glynt utility bill PDFs into data. So we've seen a lot of bills. We know that you have to break apart the bill and look at how much of the transmission charges will be affected by solar, how much of the generation charges. That differs by utility. So now we're into a reduced bill impact, and then you have to think about whether they have a gas furnace or not. That differs by household. Then you have to think about their level of energy use. Have I already bored you with all the complications? The point is, software makes that really easy and done. So we're turning the solar company away from a field sales operation to a solar platform that immediately provides customized proposals. And that means the capabilities of excellence in a solar company have to be more on the software level. And perhaps there's a layer of the industry that will generate this customized tools as an extension of CRM and so on. But it's got to be data-driven, personalized, and as I said before, just turn this all into, I know exactly what I'm buying from the very beginning. This is exactly what I'm going to get. Because otherwise, we're not going to cut through and speak to the resident at hand.
Yeah, Scott, can you add to that? What do solar contractors need to be thinking about to make smart choices about their software?
Yeah, so I think that's right. So I think our industry can kind of borrow the concept that's worked well in other industries, and that's the idea of a technology stack. And so the entire idea of a technology stack is that you're no longer trying to find that one software tool that does it all, because the reality is those tools that try, they just don't do it very well. Instead, businesses that will adopt a set of different software tools or a technology stack to run their business, with each tool being the best one for that specific task. So if you think about it, what that also means is that these tools, they must be able to communicate and integrate with the other software tools. So take, for example, Bodhi. We think we're the best customer experience platform out there, but we also distinctly know that we're not a CRM, project management software, or a proposal tool. There are better ones in the market than one we could ever build. And so what we've strategically done is built a whole set of integrations to support that ecosystems. And if you talk to Joe, he's a really good example of someone who's actually truly embraced the concept of a technology stack for Ipsun.
Okay. Ned, I want to go to you, and I want to try something a little bit different. I'd like to have you to have a conversation with Joe here, and you work with a lot of companies on how to change and how to create new innovative solutions. So what can you take a similar approach, just in a few minutes with Joe to talk to him about his business and think about, how he might change or approach innovation at this time?
Yeah, I mean, happy to. I think when we're thinking about specific opportunities, it always starts with trying to get a deep understanding of the problem that we're trying to solve before we jump to what's the right solution and how do we build and all that. So the places that I would really dig deep are one, really trying to understand what problem are we trying to solve for the consumer. And we talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. And Ted Levitt has this great quote that consumers don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole. The consumer doesn't necessarily want a solar panel. They're trying to solve some other fundamental problem, whether it's economic related or signaling something to their community about their values. But what problem, what's the biggest, most important unmet problem that we could go after? And then the second piece, innovation is often about trying to overcome barriers that prevent consumers from adopting new solutions and changing their behaviors. And I'd be curious Joe's perspective on what have been some of the biggest barriers that you wrestle with when you talk to customers.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers is around permitting and interconnections. It's very difficult to set good expectations with customers when permitting authorities and utilities are constantly changing their rules around solar and storage, which is a very new industry where they need to get comfortable and understand it. So there's a lot of permitting jurisdictions we work with that don't quite understand solar yet, certainly don't understand storage, and are trying to make rules that keep everybody safe, sometimes go a little too far, but they are always when we sell a job, and in DC, being in Maryland, DC, and Virginia, many different counties, sub-counties, towns, hamlets, with all different kinds of rules, it can be difficult to set expectations around how long it's going to take, which is why I think it was Scott mentioning that there's 4 out of 5 people are disappointed by those first couple of months of their solar project development. A lot of that is why. If we had everything in our hands from design to installation, it would obviously go a lot faster. There'd be a lot fewer frustrated people. But it's difficult because it's a constantly moving target. And so we want to set expectations that are reasonable, but we also don't want to say it's going to take 8 to 10 months to get your project done,
Right.
because that's not compelling. So I think that's the biggest thing that we face day to day.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I only have a passing knowledge, with the industry and the challenges that you all are wrestling with, but it seems like there's an interesting tension in this space that to cross the chasm, you've got more and more consumers who don't want to engage with that complexity, right? And so, in those situations, when you have that type of disconnect, the thing that I think we see that becomes really, really important is, is this trust factor, right? They really need to be able to trust, the person they're dealing with, that they're getting the right solution, and that even though they don't understand why it's taking so long, like that is that's the best that it can be done. And so, I'm curious if you said that, hey, we're going to optimize, the experience and how we engage with customers to maximize, trust. What would we do differently, or what could we draw from, other things that we have in our life where there's a situations that requires a high degree of trust, and another industry has figured out how to deliver that trust. What is it? What have they done, and could we adopt some of those behaviors into our business?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would love to do, and I'm still trying to figure out how to do, is to provide an estimated install date for every single customer in a system like Bodhi, where it's changing depending on the circumstances. It's changing depending on how quickly we move or how quickly the permitting authority moves, because that's what everyone wants to know. And today, the way that works is someone sends me an email and says, what's going on with my project? Where am I in the queue? And I tell them, here's the number of people in the queue. Here's the number of people ahead of you. Here's how many projects we're doing every week. We think it's going to be 5 weeks. And it's very not automated. So having something like that, I think, would go a long way toward building trust. If you could say in the beginning of the process, here's how many projects we've got. Here's how long we think it's going to take based on full transparency And then as things change, you can inform the customer based on changing circumstances, and they can go see their estimated install date. I think that would build a lot of trust, and I haven't seen that done yet, but I'm sure it can be done.
Ned, we got a question in the chat channel, and it says companies that vertically integrate have been a very disappointing experience. They got into inverters and it was a disaster. The jack of all trades, master of none idea. There seems to be a seesaw from unbundling to bundling business lines. I struggle with this idea of branching out and get pressure internally to expand our offering. What are the most important principles for making a decision on this line of business?
Yeah, it's a good one. I mean, I think you need to have a pretty strong hypothesis on why that would be valuable. How does it create, value from the consumer in terms of a better experience, lower cost offering, a better, more integrated, design. So you really need to think through the customer side of that equation. And then the other side is, I think you'd really want to understand and have a clear hypothesis on value creation from a business model perspective. So does vertical integration allow us to change how we do supply and logistics? Does it reduce cost in some areas of our business in some, fundamental way? Does it strip out complexity of, the business? But when you're evaluating those types of synergies, it's really a question of value to the consumer and value to the business entity.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just jump in on that,
Yeah.
that was a great question from Tayoko, and probably that focused energy, which was what we were called before we were BayWa, was based on really limiting what we focused on so that we could do it as well as possible. And there's always temptation in this industry to branch into other product lines, new types of products, etc. And it's a discipline, one, to resist that temptation. But as Ned is saying, it's also really important to recognize when the value that you can create for your customer by providing more integration becomes a key differentiator. And it's reminding me of kind of going back to basics and Jim Collins' hedgehog principle. And if you can identify what you're passionate about, what drives your economic engine, and what you can do better than anyone else, and work on things in the intersection of those three questions, then that might inform the kinds of choices you would make about how, whether it's worth creating more complexity in your business. So contractors who are more consultative are, as Joe is saying, learning how to set clear expectations with their customers so they can make promises that they can then deliver. If that's a core competency and building trust is a core competency, that could expand into being the trusted partner that's providing whole home solutions. And I'm just fishing there, right? That's a question that each contractor needs to look at from their own hedgehog perspective. But I would go back to basics. I think it's a strategic question, not a tactical one.
Scott, I'm curious, and if anyone else wants to weigh in, but you told me, that solar is the gateway to the home energy system of the future, and based on what Boaz just said, it really seems like that kind of positioning is something that contractors really need to be thinking about. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, because this is actually based off of really two main trends. First off is that there are more and more energy products and services that are becoming available to the consumer. You've got the batteries, but you've got smart panels, you've got home automation. There are many more products that are being already pushed to the consumer. And we saw that at SPI last year. But the second really interesting trend is the fact that who's going to really help them sort through them all? It's definitely not going to be the utilities, who have a horrible relationship with their customers. So if the contractors have developed that trusted relationship with their customers, then they can actually fill that void. And consumers are then going to turn to them to figure out what type of battery they need, or what type of EV, or what is just best for them. Just like you had mentioned, in that consultative kind of model, they're the ones that are going to be able to curate what is best for that consumer. And so, for example, when we were working with Lighthouse Solar, a regional installer down in Central Texas, we helped them re-engage with their customers. And for some of these customers, it was the first time in 5 years or 10 years. And many of the customers were like, oh yeah, Lighthouse, they were great. Wait, should I do anything with my system? It's been 5 or 10 years. I mean, what about these other things I keep on hearing about? And so that just gives you kind of this sense of the opportunity that does lie ahead for these companies to turn from just a solar contractor into that home energy service provider, or just simply the energy company of the future. So,
Martha, any thoughts on target market, and how to position your own company to make that target market larger?
Yes, I've been thinking about this as we've been speaking, and we all know that Energy Sage has done a fantastic job at building organic content, so that when you search on solar, lots of articles they've written over the years appear. And that just helps educate the market from discovery through sales. The conversations we're having today have largely been, hello, I want solar. But if we shift to earlier in the sales process, how do I know I want solar? What can it do for me? It strikes me that a company can differentiate itself by being its local educator. And, Energy Sage has given us an example. There's other ways to do it within your community that complement and enhance that. But then you're positioning yourself as the trusted guide. And as I hear trust, and we know that in other industries, this digital journey is way more digital and has chatbots and points of confirmation to build trust. I don't see that in solar owned by the solar company. I see it owned by aggregators. Well, let's pull it back into the company and use our local expertise to build trust through marketing and enhanced marketing.
Great. Ned, I'd like to pull you back in here as we start to wrap up and talk about what solar contractors can be thinking about as they evaluate their business. And I know that you're not part of the solar industry directly, but is there a point in an organization when they need to be thinking about that next phase? How do they know when it's time to adjust the strategy and innovate? And getting back to Martha's points about the recession and what's coming, is going into recession a good time even to be shaking things up? You're muted, actually.
Muted there.
There you go.
So maybe to take a second one first, I think recession is a tough time to innovate, but has some unique benefits. If you look at a lot of the data, on company performance coming out of a recession, companies that were able to sustain some level of innovation, during the recession came out, ahead. And there's some pretty simple reasons for that, right? I mean, you can get, a jump on your competitors. You have the opportunity to shape the new models that are coming out. And so you really get some competitive advantage. The second thing that I think is, important to a lot of this conversation is, if you look at, theories of kind of behavior change, Kurt Lewin, one of the founders of social psychology, has this theory that says that, basically, habits that consumers have get frozen in. There's some sort of external exogenous shock. There's a period where those behaviors get unfrozen and people experiment with new models, and then they very quickly get, sort of locked back in. And so a lot of what we're talking about, may require consumers to be open to new models, to adapt, some of their habits, be willing to trial and explore things. And it's very tough to do that, in sort of a status quo type of environment. But the type of a shock that we have right now has forced people to step back, question a lot of those behaviors, and display a degree of openness. And so, companies and contractors who can take advantage of that to trial new models and try different ways of engaging can get some benefit out of that. So I would say it's obviously tough. Resources are fewer, are not as available, but if you can find, efficient, focused ways of doing that, you can get some benefits.
Great.
To your bigger question, I guess, on how you think about, when to innovate and change. I think there's a few fault lines that, if you see, cracks, opening up along a couple dimensions, it's worth a consideration. So if you see consumer needs or behaviors changing, I think that's important. If you see how the industry evaluates, performance, that's important. If you see a lot of signs that the structure of the industry may be changing, so vertical integration, disintermediation, new non-traditional competitors coming in, all of those, suggest that the industry may be at, some sort of precipice, for change, and if you see, fundamental changes in the business models, in terms of, how companies create value or the resources and processes that are required to be successful changing, that also suggests that there's, some sort of fundamental, shift underway. And it's worthwhile to step back from, the current model and ask the question, is there a fundamentally different way to do this? Do we need to fundamentally, change our strategy to continue to be, relevant in that future world?
Great. Vikram, I'd like to come over to you and then start to wrap up here. But as we talk about change and learning, and cross-sectoral conversations that need to happen, who do you want to talk to? Where are you looking for inspiration, both in your business and in your own thinking? And you're muted, by the way. Yeah.
Got to remember to unmute. Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's always, I think we've heard from a number of folks, you got to be talking to the stakeholders, right? You got to be, if the consumer is one of your key stakeholders, just really engage in those discussions and engage with our team. I think one couple things that we do is we encourage the idea. We are rolling out our company's values this week to our team. And one of those is we are actually highlighting that we are an innovative company and we need to continuously think about innovation. And innovation, basically saying to our team, hey, disruption is fine. We are fine. We need to think about innovation, even if it disrupts our current business, because we'd rather disrupt ourselves than have somebody else disrupt our business. So you never know where innovative ideas come from. I know we don't have the time to talk about the story of Energy Sage. We pivoted about 8 years ago, and we are what we are because of that pivot. But it was because of an off-the-cuff remark by one of my teammates that resulted in us pivoting and creating this marketplace. So because we were brainstorming ideas on what needs to be done differently, what are the opportunities, and just in the brainstorming session, somebody makes a comment, and man, that results in an innovative idea, right? So talk to your customers, talk to your team, just have a commitment towards innovation, continuous improvement. It could be Kaizen, small incremental change, or a very big change. Just have that commitment, and hopefully I'm so glad that we're talking about this topic.
Great.
Just have that commitment. The rest is easy.
It starts there, right? As I think Ned said, like, you really got to understand if there is a problem and what is that problem, and then solutions generally become easier at that point.
Yeah. Great. Well, I want to start to wrap up here, and I want to mention that, we're seeing these as the beginning of this conversation. Boaz put it when we all chatted together, this is a prologue to this broader conversation about where do we want to go as a solar industry. So I really thank everyone on this call for taking a moment to share their thoughts and their wisdom. And we really appreciate you being the part of the conversation and our community. So before I pose one final question to all of you, I'd like to ask Jessica to throw the link to the next town hall in the chat so people can go ahead and sign up. And we'll talk about, how to create a diverse and equitable solar industry. Which is a really important topic. So before we say goodbye, I'm going to ask each of our guests to share 2 suggestions. The first suggestion is something that solar contractors should definitely look into and possibly adopt, and something folks should leave behind now. So Vikram, why don't you kick us off here? And you're muted again. There you go.
Oh man, Tom, do you mind sorry, I have a big truck in the background and I...
Sure, yeah, I can. Scott, how about we go to you?
Yes, sure. Okay. So the thing that they should adopt, I think all solar installers, the new energy companies of the future, they should create and sell a post-install engagement plan. So for example, an O&M offering that turns a 25-year liability into a 25-year recurring revenue opportunity. And as a leave behind, I say let's leave behind this idea of the solar coaster, or the idea that there's all these external factors that buffet the industry and give us these excuses to not really focus on the customer. So we just have this imperative to just be excellent in the face of what comes.
Great. Martha, what should we leave behind? What should we look into? And you're muted too, by the way.
Apologies. I really, really want us to focus on the value prop to the consumer and make that super clear. I worry that the target market has shrunk in a recession. So keeping the available target alive requires to be super clear about what you get as a consumer. And instead of talking about a leave behind for the industry, I want to say my team is doing a big machine learning release in 2 weeks. And that is innovation during COVID. And the team is remarkably cheerful and steady. So I just wanted to comment on that spillover, that innovation is risky during these times, but it has all these spillover benefits too.
Wonderful. Good luck, Martha. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just going on the automation theme, look into automating some processes that you might not have thought were automatable, like hooking up your CRM and your ERP to automate your accounts receivable. That's something we've done recently. So now when a deal moves to a certain construction milestone stage, it sends out the invoice automatically, and we've automated our accounts receivable. There's all sorts of little things like that that are possible now that might not have been possible a couple of years ago. What to leave behind? Leave behind the idea that things cannot radically change in the industry in the United States. I got to meet with one of Scott's colleagues a couple weeks ago who spent 3 months in Australia, and he reminded me that in Australia, solar is half to a third the cost of what it is in the United States. I want to repeat that. In Australia, solar is half to a third of the cost that is in the United States. There's a great article that Green Tech Media posted a few years ago called How to Have the Cost of Solar in the United States. Things can change if this community bands together and demands it. And we will not survive unless we get to $2 a watt in a year and a half when the ITC goes to zero. So we've got to look at big change. And somebody asked about what's going to happen with a new administration that's pro-solar. We've got to find a way to cut red tape to make the process faster, have more happier customers, and a lower cost.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Ned, your 2 thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, maybe related to Joe's to drive that sort of change. I think the industry needs to have a a longer term lens, on strategy and where it wants to go. It's very difficult to drive change if you're thinking 6 or 12 months out. There's just there's not enough runway to really drive transformational growth. Companies that are able to do it really have a clear perspective on how they see the world changing over a 5 or 10 year horizon, and then chart a path for evolving to some new model over that period of time. In terms of what to leave behind, I mean, I think inspired by some of our earlier conversations, leave behind the assumptions, the legacy assumptions about how the industry works that just aren't relevant to the current or future world.
Great. Vikram, I'm going to go to you, and then I'm going to pop to Boaz and say goodbye to everybody. Your 2 thoughts, please.
Yeah, on the first one, I think I would say consumer education and transparency, a commitment to both of those. I think they can really accelerate market adoption for solar and reduce the customer acquisition cost. And one thing to leave behind, this is a little bit more tactical. I'm hoping someday we'll get rid of 100% commission-only sales teams. That's just my small.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say goodbye to everybody and then give Boaz a chance to give us his 2 thoughts and also say goodbye. But we have Vikram Aggarwal, CEO and founder of Energy Sage, the online marketplace. We had Ned Calder from Innosight, an innovation firm founded in Boston. Joe from Ipsun Solar, or Ipsun, excuse me. Martha Amram, CEO of Glynt. Thank you for joining us. Scott Nguyen of 17 terawatts. Really appreciate having you on the show today. And then Boaz, why don't we leave with you? Give us your 1 thought on leave behind and look into, and then, say goodbye.
Thanks, Tom. And thanks again to a great panel. It's really hard to follow a lot of other great thoughts about what we should keep in mind and leave behind. So I'm going to just go really general. What I'd like to see is leaders in the solar industry asking how might we more consistently, and leaving behind we've always. And it's I know that everybody in the solar industry that I talk to wants to innovate, and I notice also that many people come into that innovation discussion with a lot of preconceptions, and I just really want to emphasize how important it is to ask really open questions like how might we blank, and to encourage our teams to do that as well. So yeah, in terms of wrapping up, I guess I just wanted to mention, sometimes I'm tempted to try to put a bow on a far-reaching conversation. So I'm going to attempt that a little bit here. There were really two themes that came out to me in terms of kind of the threats and opportunities part of the SWOT analysis that were talked about today. And one was the convergence of various technologies and the opportunity to innovate in relationship to that. And the other was building customer trust as something that we might be doing better and better, but where we might also have a long way to go. And then in terms of the capabilities that support those two themes, software came up again and again and was even mentioned as something that contractors need to embrace and excel at, or have as a core competence, which I thought was an interesting statement, I think, from Scott. We also talked about segmenting the market so we can offer the right kind of education at the right point in the customer journey for the right type of customer, and the right product for the right customer in their customer journey. And there was discussion about how we can use automation to support that, but also about how we need to think more carefully about how we create customer trust throughout the customer journey, and think about the customer journey more broadly. And of course, there was discussion about integrating new technologies, which will be ongoing. Final comment, as Tom mentioned, this is a prologue. I envision having a series of discussions, maybe indefinitely, about what innovation means in the solar industry. So thank you so much for joining us and for your great questions. And I look forward to seeing you next time.